Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining me on the Everyday Investor. In today's podcast, the latest iteration of ChatGPT 4.0, suggests that an exponential growth curve is in full effect. Now, I, for one, just for a bit of background, was a little bit skeptical with the whole AI thing as it relates to these technology companies. Take NVIDIA, for example. It's one of the magnificent seven, one of the big seven tech companies, but NVIDIA is one of those companies that specializes in graphics processing units, or GPUs. And ultimately, it's one of those companies that's possibly best positioned for potential growth in the AI computing world. I wouldn't have picked that their unbelievable performance would continue and persist like it has, though. I was wrong, and I was reminded yet again, the faster they grow, the more uncertain it becomes in terms of trying to pick whether or not they're over or undervalued at any given point in time. But the whole thing has really caught my attention, this whole AI space. And there's only really ever been two other times where I've seen a very high conviction investment thesis kind of play out before my eyes. One is a leveraged residential property owning strategy, and the other one is Bitcoin. The death of traditional finance and the rise of the digital asset ecosystem is upon us, and it should change the way that we invest. Now, that means there's a new type of financial infrastructure that we can invest in. You can call it the compute thematic if you like, if you want to be fancy, but it's effectively about investing in what runs the new matrix that will all be plugged into one day, regardless of how scary that sounds. Now, let's record where we are at today, though. ChatGPT 4.0 can now understand lengthy bits of legislation to the point where it might be capable now of supercharging any small legal firm. But it'll also make it possible for everyday people to fight back against a better funded legal team. Imagine no barriers to travel, though. Imagine no barriers to living in other countries and mixing with the locals and conversing freely using your phone with the right application installed on it. We're digital nomads and sovereign individuals now, unbound by the nation state because there are no longer any borders. Clearly, all the single people will soon have their very own digital life partner. We'll all have access to a broader circle of friends, or we might have access to a dream team of advisor bots that are constantly working on our behalf to improve our financial position while we sleep. We might even be digitally resurrecting loved ones who have passed away using family photos and old movies. Who knows? We offer up the information that matters the most in exchange for happiness. So exciting, so freaking terrifying too. Putting morality aside and whether this is a utopian or a dystopian future, consider the investment thesis. We're not even scratching the surface with considering the technology as it is today. But going beyond the traditional investment methods of just picking the companies that are best positioned to benefit from AI, what are some of the other ways that we can invest in this artificial intelligence land grab? Well, let's consider renewable energy. You have to invest in the hardware, capture the wind or the solar first, the turbines or the solar panels and all the structure associated with that. You have to do all that collection stuff before you can send any power across a transmission network. And by the time you've done that, the transmission network probably isn't upgraded enough to handle it. So the problem is the production of renewable electricity is often not aligned with the incentives on the other end in terms of consumption and delivery of it. So what does AI have to do with the transition to renewable energy? Well, before I answer that, one more thing to throw in the mix. And while this episode really isn't about Bitcoin, we're talking about one of the side effects of it, which is massive energy consumption. So before BlackRock had a Bitcoin exchange-traded fund, it was actually considered harmful to the environment. Some mining operations run on fossil fuels and coal, so of course you can see the logic there. But thanks to the good work of previous and future guests on this exact podcast, we now know that Bitcoin mining is actually good for the planet. So both AI and Bitcoin require significant computational power, and their growth, or their growth rate of adoption, is consistently driving up energy demand at an accelerating pace. Now, you may already understand this, or it might seem obvious, but for those that are new to it, or for those that just want to reflect on how amazing this is, imagine this. Mobile data centers located in areas that need a high demand for power, which then justify the investment into low-cost energy generation. That whole process kicks off a chain of events which leads to the build-out of better transmission, better retail operations, and ultimately lower-cost power, which is more reliable and better for the planet for everyone. Sam Kivi is the Chief Technology Officer, CTO, and Director at GridShare. It's a New Zealand company which is focused on integrating renewable energy with high-demand computing tasks such as AI processing and Bitcoin mining. With over 10 years of experience in the energy sector and 7 years in electronics manufacturing and design, Sam has been instrumental in developing innovative products for smart grids. Hope you enjoy this podcast. Here's a timely reminder, though, that some investments and strategies discussed on this podcast are very high risk. This is probably one of them. Investing in some of the things or ideas discussed like this may lead to a loss of your wealth. So please enjoy the discussion today, but do not act on anything without getting your own advice. With that said, let's get started. You're listening into the Everyday Investor Podcast. Passive investing, property investment, managed funds, and crypto. If you're an everyday person wanting to build new wealth for the new world that you're heading into, then this podcast is for you. I'm Darcy Ungaro, your host. I'm a qualified financial advisor, but I'm still learning how to invest better and teach others how to do the same. I talk with guests and cover a range of topics designed to get you to think for yourself here. But please keep in mind, this can't be considered financial advice. Be sure to do your own research here and seek qualified advice of your own before making investment decisions. If you want more information, check out the show notes in your podcast player and make sure that you've subscribed to YouTube also. Then follow the Everyday Investor on all social media channels. The NZ Everyday Investor Podcast receives support from the following partners: Easy Crypto, the safe and easy way to buy and sell crypto in New Zealand; Gorilla Technology, increasing business success through innovative and strategic IT solutions; Ungaro & Co. Financial Advice for everyday people building everyday wealth. Hope you enjoy the show. Let's get started. All right, welcome everybody to the Everyday Investor. Today I'm catching up with Sam Kivi, co-founder and CTO of GridShare. How are you, Sam?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Darcy. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Hey, thanks for catching up with me. So why don't you start off just by telling me a little bit about GridShare, how it came to be, and what you guys do at the moment?
So GridShare was a company founded back in 2018. A couple of us had this idea that the key to growing renewables and managing the intermittency that they provide on the grid when they generate electricity and then stop generating electricity is actually to consume that when it's available and turn off that consumption when it's not available in a smoothing fashion. I think the idea of using computing energy to provide that consumption was, I think, the basis for that concept. Large amounts of compute, but compute that can be turned on and off rapidly without upsetting whatever it is that the compute is doing. And that's, I think, the basis of it. My particular background and entry into that concept was working for a company in Christchurch called Inatel. We were working on solar inverters, the power electronics technology that connects your solar panels on your home into the grid. And I could really see we were trying to get this down as cheap as possible. But I could tell that if you generate electricity in your home, but you don't use it in your home and it exports into the grid by default, and you don't get paid much for that, the return on investment is never going to be great for that solar panel investment. And therefore, the uptake of solar in residential homes is never going to be that fantastic. And so I think when I left that company, that was my overriding sort of fundamental principle. How do we make renewable energy really return on investment so that it gets uptake and adoption at a faster growth rate than we currently have, which is really going to help address the renewable energy transition. The step we made once we sort of formed this idea of GridShare was to go much bigger than just your home, that really this solution is very scalable. You can just add more computers and that you can put those computers where the energy is variable and where the energy is cheap for the computing, because that's one part of the equation. We worked on that concept for a while, and we took the idea to several generators in New Zealand. It's a pretty out there idea. Hey, we want to put a big box of computers next to your hydro dam or your wind farm, and we want to buy power from you sometimes, but sometimes we'll turn it off and we'll let the power go into the grid. We got a contract in about 2021, and we've since built a 2 megawatt site in Southland next to a hydro dam. And that really started as a proof of concept for us. Can we control the compute the way that we want and still deliver what we need to the generator in terms of paying them a reasonable amount for the energy they produce? But also, can we turn off our computing and deliver the energy into the grid when it's needed in the grid? And we've been running that for about 2 years now. That's been a great success. It's still growing in capacity. We're still adding more computers. That's really the basis for and the launching point for our next projects.
Just to kind of talk about solar generation, maybe it's a domestic solar panel setup. What does happen? Like we have solar in our property, and so I kind of understand this from my end. But I think it's a pretty cool parallel as we get into this conversation to explain a little bit more about what you guys do and just how mining works in general. But maybe if you could just break down like the main components of solar panels, inverter, you got the grid, maybe a battery. How do they all work together generally in a domestic solar situation?
Well, typically you've got a solar PV panel or 10 or 12 on a roof, and they are converting the sun's energy directly on the panel into a direct current, a DC form of electricity. Now, that's not what most of our appliances or our homes anyway, not what our homes run on. They all run on AC. What we need is a converter that converts that DC energy from the panels, same energy that a battery delivers, DC power. We have an inverter, which is really critical for connecting that solar energy into two things. One is energy you can use in your home, but also connecting it into the grid. And the inverter plays quite an important role there. It synchronizes everything with the grid and performs lots of safety features so that people don't get electrocuted. If you've got a generator on your home, it's important that it doesn't generate if the grid goes out. So the inverter is sort of the center of that whole system. And obviously that system's only generating electricity when sun is shining. So you sort of have this curve where in the morning it's low and then it climbs up and it peaks and then it drops down again. Now, you can obviously have clouds come over, or you've got a tree obstructing your panels. It might suddenly drop off. But that's typically the curve that you see from the output of a solar generating system on your home. And you might have occasion where you're generating lots of power during the day. This is the most common case. But nobody's home to use the power. You might be able to put your dishwasher on to run while it's sunny. But generally speaking, most of society is not at home. They are at work. We tend to use most of our energy as a society in the mornings and the evenings. So you can imagine there's a mismatch there. Lots of power being generated during the day, but all our demand, all the usage is in the evenings with these peaks in the evenings. So it's not this perfect alignment. Putting solar on your home doesn't necessarily meet all your energy needs because you need them in the evening and the morning. And so obviously batteries is one way to solve that. You can install a battery, charge it up during the day, and then use it to power the devices or as much as you can during the evening. That might be for running your oven or heating your hot water. The problem with that, batteries are expensive. And when you charge them up, they are getting charged for free, so that energy is stored for free in the battery. But when you're discharging it, you're only getting about maybe 20 cents equivalent. And so the time to pay back on an expensive battery is even longer. And so in that scenario, really the best thing you can do if you want to accelerate the adoption of these sorts of systems is to make use of the energy when it is being generated. Storing it has cost, capital cost, and an efficiency cost, because you don't get all the power out of a battery that you put in. So that's the typical dilemma of solar. If you work from home or you live at home and you're using energy during the day, solar can be a great use case. And also for commercial solar, that obviously works because an office building needs to be powered. So there are definitely useful examples for solar, but the residential solar uptake is really challenging. And if you expand that concept out to a country or a society as a whole, you have the same problem. The energy tends to be wanted in the morning and in the evening. And wind obviously can be generated at any time, but it does come and go, and solar is very predictable, but only during the day. That's why we in New Zealand do rely on hydro a lot, and geothermal as well, and coal. So coal is used particularly in the North Island to power everyone's homes when they all come home and turn on their ovens and start cooking tea.
It's really similar to investing, right? Where you have diversified investments that you might make, and the whole idea is to blend out the rate of return. Yes. I guess here we have a situation where we're trying to blend out and spread out that bell curve a little bit, right? Where we have more of that free energy from the sun being applied. So you might be running your heater, your crock pot, your oven, charging your electric car, doing whatever you can. But yeah, I see what you're saying, right? So like if you're charging a battery, that's great, but because the power that is saving you is so cheap, it's not really getting an opportunity to give you a payback. So you kind of need to think about this at a commercial level. So when you're thinking about more, I want to say industrial, but that's not the right word. But when you're thinking about power generation at scale, that's where I guess the concept of Bitcoin mining, or I guess running computers to do computation, that's where it comes in, right?
That's right. If you think about all of the compute resources that we're not really aware of, they happen in the background, but enormous computing power, megawatts, hundreds of megawatts in data centers. And really what we're trying to say is Bitcoin, but also other kinds of compute, it doesn't matter as long as we can pause that compute and not interrupt or break whatever it's trying to do. So we're selecting types of compute to place out for use at times when energy is plentiful, and to be available to turn off when the grid needs the power, or the resource, the wind or the solar, is not available. Really, what we're trying to do is optimize the utilization of that energy asset. If that energy asset, that wind farm, is fully utilized, it'll pay back much quicker, it'll return better for the investors, and then the hope is that they'll want to build another project with the same more attractive economics, and therefore we can accelerate the use and the adoption. And the thing is, at the same time that we're turning on and off, we're able to deliver more energy into the grid when it's needed. And I think that will lower the cost of delivering renewable energy to the average end consumer. The cost of renewable energy doesn't have to be increased by the level of investment that we need to apply. It can be offset by this model.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's kind of like, again, just trying to break this down really simply. So if there was, I don't know, like an engine running, but there was no resistance, it was just running in neutral, and the revs were just going. You're burning a lot of fuel. Yep, you're generating a lot of power in theory, but it's not being applied to anything, and so it's complete waste. And
that's right, because it's like an idling engine.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, one of the analogies I think of is if you're a trucking company and you purchased a $200,000 truck to do deliveries, but you only used it for 4 hours a day, it would take a long time to pay back on that truck. Whereas if you could use it, 99% of the time, that truck would deliver a lot more value back to you sooner. And it's really the same. I think what's not appreciated is how little these wind farms, solar farms are actually utilized. They're pretty low utilization, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of wasted energy globally, just because the grid can't handle all of the power that the wind farms produce. They often produce a lot more power than they can actually output, so they get curtailed.
When you say curtailed, you're talking about they basically get turned off, where
they're spinning off the wind turbines. That's right.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cases in Australia where the energy pricing, because of all the solar there, is negative during the day. So you get penalized for producing power and putting it into the grid during the day. And so those wind farms are turned off.
Okay, that's interesting. So like when I look at my app to monitor my solar panels at home right now, I could see it shifting from charging the battery to then 100% taking care of the load. And if the battery's fully charged, it sends it back to the grid. This is all happening like instantaneously. It's just going wherever it's required. But I know that 100% of the energy that those solar panels produce is being used in one of those three places, charging the battery used by the house being sent to the grid. And so I guess when we think about this at a mass scale, it's the same sort of thing. I didn't realize that, but if there's that much power that's just sitting idle and is not being used, then that incentive drops, right? And then therefore there's less investment, and it just takes longer to roll out a transition towards renewable energy. That's the problem that you're trying to solve, right?
Correct, absolutely. And I mean, if you look at the conversation going on in New Zealand now around how do we transition all of our processes away from emission-based to a clean electric-based, how do we fund all of the infrastructure for that? Who pays for that? Does the government pay for that? Does the end user pay for that directly? And we're trying to say, well, we've got a solution here that utilizes all of these assets at the right time, but it doesn't cause a problem by utilizing it when everyone else needs it at certain hours of the day. So it's a way of funding and utilizing all these assets to the optimum level.
Okay. And this conversation that we're having today would be more controversial, I guess, if we would have had this perhaps 2 years ago when the latest bit of FUD or fear, uncertainty, and doubt to hit our shores around Bitcoin was all about how Bitcoin was bad for the environment because of how much energy it consumed. Because of why? Do you want to explain how Bitcoin mining works?
Yeah. So Bitcoin mining at its simplest is an amount of compute resource, and a little computer can look just like an old desktop computer used to look. And it's really using a whole lot of energy. We call that work. It's using that energy to solve a cryptographic puzzle, essentially, and almost like a race to find the next block on the Bitcoin chain. And if a whole lot of those computers are working together, they have a greater chance of finding the next block to add to the Bitcoin blockchain. They get rewarded for that, and they share that reward amongst those miners in a very democratic way. And so all around the world, there are miners, large and small, someone in their home with a computer that they're running one of these, or there's enormous sites where there's hundreds of megawatts in a big building. Depending on where it's deployed and what energy source it's using, it can be damaging. That's not the problem with the Bitcoin blockchain itself. That's really about policy, about what kinds of energy you're allowed to use. So we use only renewable energy for ours. I think it's the same case for whether you choose to watch Netflix. If you're streaming Netflix from a server in New Zealand, it's probably coming from a Sydney-based data center, would be my guess, and that's all powered by coal. Bitcoin is really as clean as the energy that it's produced is powering it. And if we can use that flexible compute tool to help grow renewable energy, Bitcoin is always going to be hunting down the cheapest form of energy, and we should put policies in place to incentivize the renewable uptake.
So just thinking about this in terms of a battery, right? So it's not the same thing in that you're storing energy, which will later be discharged at night to run your house, for example. But it is finding another use for the surplus power that might be generated during the day. And it's basically pushing motors, which are pushing fans and pushing electricity through CPUs to do computation, right? Like that's kind of what's happening. Again, thinking micro first. Is this something that you think will be an offering that might roll out in domestic solar applications where you might see solar panels on houses, but instead of batteries, they're actually doing Bitcoin mining during the day, and instead of selling that power back to the network, they're actually sharing in a resource of Bitcoin because they're part of a mining pool or something like that. Is that actually already happening, by the way?
It's actually where the concept of grid share started.
through that.
Yeah, this is exactly when I left the solar inverter company. I was thinking immediately, I'll try and use Bitcoin to use the solar energy that's otherwise being exported to the grid for pennies. I realized I didn't want to start the business on a consumer level, because trialing these things with consumers, in my experience at that company, is tricky. People unplug. They unplug things and they change their Wi-Fi passwords a lot. And so that can make rolling out and testing this very difficult. There is absolutely there's a few products out there that are trying to get there. One of them is marketed as a heater. So it's just a Bitcoin miner. It produces heat and also makes money. This is definitely something we have looked at pretty seriously. We're just not ready to tackle that because it's a whole other level of challenge. And we think we can have bigger impact on the emissions and the transition to renewable energy doing sort of what we're doing first. But I think there absolutely is a place for very small scale. It does scale very well down to the household, where you've got a Bitcoin miner that will be just a machine that might sit in your attic or in the garage. It'll pump heat through into your home. It'll help heat your home in the winter. And it'll also provide the best return for the energy you're producing on the solar panels, for example.
It's just this whole thing just blows my mind, right? Because at the same time, you're fixing the money, you're fixing the money system, and you're fixing the world
right.
as well. So how's that for an ethical combination where you're taking renewable energy, you're heating your homes so that you're not reliant on fossil fuels, and you're making it more efficient and more secure to operate a financial system? That's cool.
Absolutely. I think the part I love about this, the model that it goes down, it can go from our scale down to the average homeowner, is it puts the power in their hands, not only on the monetary side, but it puts they have the power to convert the energy that they can produce into something of value themselves. They're not reliant on grid connection or whatever the power company can offer them for their solar energy. It is a choice that they're empowered to sort of take action themselves.
Yeah. Decentralized power. That's what it is. It's cool. Okay, so we've talked about this at a micro level, at the household level. Now, let's go back again to understanding what GridShare does. So you have a black box, let's say, in the South Island, and that's being fed with renewable energy, and you're using that to do compute. And there's lots of computing going on in that box, right? But you can turn it on and off. You can control the demand so that you can kind of smooth out the amount of excess production. And that's more or less the model, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, if we take the case that we have operating now, that's at a hydro dam. It's got a relatively stable supply of energy. Occasionally, they do need to turn us off for maintenance and that sort of thing. But right now, what happens is the data center operates off hydro dam powerhouse, and when power prices peak, because we're watching the power price all the time, the wholesale power price is moving every half hour. We're not really aware of that as consumers of energy, but it's changing all the time. And when everyone comes home and plugs in their EV and starts cooking dinner, the power price peaks because it's really a supply-demand market. And so we might turn off for a few hours in the evening when the power price peaks, and that means that the megawatts of power we would have produced are just delivered into the grid supply to meet the needs of society. And we're also compensated by selling that power at the elevated price. We get to earn a little bit, so we're not losing those 2 hours of computation revenue. We are earning something that makes it much easier for us to do the right thing, which is turn off to help balance the grid, essentially. Now, on that particular site, there's some other things that we can do that are a little bit more arcane. We can provide stability services to the grid operator, to Transpower. And that means we can turn off in a fraction of a second if there's an instability. So if there's an outage somewhere in the grid, our system can react instantly and help stabilize by not being a drain on the grid at specific times. That doesn't happen often, but it's a really important part of our economy is keeping our grid stable. So these sorts of services can overlay and provide value that way.
Okay, so how does it work in the name grid share? So unwrap a little bit more of the sharing is caring part.
Sure. So we operate these miners at this site, and we're turning them on and off. There's an element of sharing there. When we turn them off, the energy is shared back into the grid. But the miners we also operate, we can host other people's miners. And so we have a number of clients. They've contracted us to maintain and service their mining machines. So we can purchase and import them. We've got really good supply chain for these machines. We bring them into the country, install them, and operate them for a fee. All the Bitcoin that the miners produce goes to and is controlled by the client. We keep the machines operating and supply the power and manage the energy side. So when we turn these off, you might expect that a typical miner anywhere else in the world would be upset if they got their machines turned off. They typically want them to run all the time. We provide them with a credit so that they're not completely losing out. They're getting some benefit from providing energy flexibility. And because they're able to do that and we're able to build a business model that incorporates that, that's allowing energy flexibility and a cheaper energy price overall for everybody, including the hostees, so that really everyone benefits, including the grid and the consumers at the other end of the grid from that arrangement.
You're buying the power for significantly less, presumably, than the power that you would be charging out to the miners or the hostees, like you say, right? Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, well, essentially, when we turn off, we're not consuming power, so we don't get charged anything. And we are earning something because the power we would have consumed is being sold. Someone else is buying it on the grid. So it's,
I see.
Yeah, right. So we're able to, when we turn off, the power is sold into the grid. If you just imagine a hose, you're diverting it from one bucket to another bucket and back again. And sometimes one bucket will pay more, and sometimes the other bucket will pay more. And so we're essentially like a switch between the grid and the compute.
And you're an intermediary in a sense too, right?
That's right. Yeah. And there's just a whole matter of benefits that for the generator, for the consumer, for the Bitcoin miner, the hostee. I think this is the future of how this is going to work. It's bringing Bitcoin to being a good citizen and a cooperative participant in our energy future.
Do you see that this could, because anybody right now, if they had the technical knowledge and know-how and they had a bit of capital, could go out there and they could set themselves up with some sort of mining operation, right? Like anyone is capable of doing this right now. And I guess the normal numbers apply. Like if they can get really cheap power and the price of Bitcoin goes up and everything kind of equalizes over time. So there's seasons where you're going to be profitable and seasons where you're not.
That's right.
But anyone can do that, right? So what you're doing is it's more like a done-for-you service where you are smoothing out the volatility in the income stream that they would get, but also you're ensuring that the cost per kilowatt is probably a lot lower than what they would otherwise be able to achieve, unless they, of course, built their own massive renewable system, right?
It's very hard to get an energy price that makes Bitcoin mining competitive in New Zealand. It's a global market. Bitcoin doesn't care where you are. Bitcoin mining doesn't care where you are. And so you're competing with some really cheap energy sources which are not clean in other parts of the world. But increasingly we're finding those energy sources like coal and are being phased out. And so Bitcoin miners are seeing renewable energy as the future, the place to go for your until the next halving, your operation. It's very hard in New Zealand to achieve this. You need to have a really good understanding of the energy sector and what a generator needs to see. And by providing a benefit to the generator, by being flexible, we remove a lot of headaches for them. And by selling the power into the grid by turning off, we're sharing the sale of that power with them. So they're doing better. We're doing better. The grid is doing better. And the hostees are able to earn a credit which offsets their energy, their overall energy cost. It's a really great win-win-win situation.
Yeah, and it is a form of investment. Here's my attempt to now try and fit this in the context of an investment podcast, right? But it really is a form of alternative investment in that you're investing in, like, if you wanted to, I guess anybody out there, as long as they had, I'm sure there would be a minimum amount that would make it worth it, but they could effectively buy the equipment, sign an agreement with GridShare or somebody similar, and it's all on. They don't even need to have any of the technical knowledge, presumably, right?
No, that's right. We've got a pretty streamlined system now. We can sign somebody up for, let's say, 5 Bitcoin mining machines. We can purchase them for them, import them, deliver them to site, install them, and then basically send you a link to the mining pool that has your miners in it. You'll just receive an invoice for the purchase and installation, and then you will receive a monthly energy invoice. It's pretty straightforward. You definitely don't need any technical expertise, just the ability to log into the pool dashboard where you can see your miners and to operate a wallet where you can receive the payouts. There's very little required in terms of technical knowledge.
There's an upfront cost. You have to sign some sort of agreement over some sort of period of time, like some sort of hosting agreement. Is that right? Where you have to commit to the power purchase over time. And so, but what you're doing is you are buying a type of Bitcoin. Effectively, you're buying a type of Bitcoin called Virgin Bitcoin, right? It's never existed before.
That's right.
It's going to be sent to your wallet. It has no prior history. So
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess a lot of people look at Bitcoin as something that is fungible. One Bitcoin is exactly the same as another, but there is this non-fungibility characteristic when you get into mining, in that if you do want something that is literally off grid and hasn't seen the light of day, that's one of the ways to do it. Yeah.
No, that is one element that is attractive for some of our hostees. It is they have this knowledge. They can go and look at this operation and see that it is generating them virgin Bitcoin, as you say. But green, they know that they're buying that they're essentially buying green Bitcoin, and they're supporting a company. We have bold vision for transforming and accelerating the renewable energy transition. And so they know they're part of that as well. And when we first started GridShare, I didn't think hosting would work. I thought hosting, miners who host, they want 100% uptime and never ever want to have their machines turned off. But I've been pleasantly surprised to find people are on board with the vision, and they love the idea of mining Bitcoin in New Zealand from a renewable energy source, and really helping be part of the story of GridShare, trying to do something really quite revolutionary in the energy sector as well.
So I'm guessing what you guys have been doing is you've been building, in a sense, a bit of a prototype operation, getting the plumbing right, getting the systems, the policy, everything all right, so that you could probably scale it better. And then that pipeline of energy going into an operation can be whatever it needs to be. But then you have this thing that it can be replicated, right? Like control, copy, paste, anywhere around the country, anywhere around the world, really. And that opens up some interesting opportunities in terms of what kind of power goes in. So talk to me about what some of the next steps are in terms of other sources of power that you might be trying to exploit.
Yeah, absolutely right. This is very reproducible. It's very modular. The control systems we've built can be copy-pasted to any energy source, essentially. We've had lots of offers of coal plants and gas plants and things, but that's not what we do. What we've been looking at is, as well as hydro, solar, and wind opportunities, we're also looking at a really exciting one for us now, which is addressing landfill methane emissions. It's not really widely understood, but there's a really big problem of methane emissions in the world coming from landfills that aren't controlled or capped. In New Zealand, we do a really good job of it at all our large landfills. You could almost say we're one of the world leaders at capping and mitigating the methane. Now,
can you just describe what capping means? I'm guessing
Sure.
it just means capturing the methane that would otherwise just go straight up in the atmosphere. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, what happens when you fill up a landfill with waste is the organic matter breaks down and releases methane in the landfill. Now, unless you cover that landfill properly with, I guess, a non-permeable layer, so some sort of cover, that gas just goes into the atmosphere and causes 80 times worse warming than CO2 does for the first 20 years. Now, if you cap that with the appropriate soil or other sort of cover and you control the gas as it comes out, what's typically done is you can flare it. That just means burning it, honestly. You just pipe the gas to a big flare stack and it's burned. Now, that does address most of the methane and turns it into CO2, which is less damaging. But there's a lost opportunity there. In a lot of landfills, there's no incentive to capture. So what we're looking to do is use the economics of the data center to find sites that can't be capped because there's no incentive to. There's no grid nearby to send the electricity to. If you were to put a generator on the landfill and use the gas to run a generator and make electricity, you need a grid to sell that power into. And what we're finding is there's a lot of landfills that are too far from the grid for that to be viable. So we're bringing the demand to the landfill, incentivizing the capture and the cover of the methane, and thereby having a direct impact on methane emissions. So we're involved in a couple of countries now, including New Zealand, with projects that we're working towards essentially using the methane from the landfill site to operate a data center.
So I like what you say around you're bringing the demand to the stranded energy asset. That's what you're doing, rather than waiting and hoping and praying that someday there'll be a grid connection. You can go anywhere because
That's right.
Your real grid is really, well, it's the blockchain.
The internet, isn't it? It's the blockchain and it's the internet, because we don't require fiber connection. We can operate off a satellite internet connection. We can anywhere you can place a shipping container and a generator, which is the same sort of shape as a shipping container. You can provide the solution.
How much of a dump do you need?
We do need these to be fairly large. So if you thought of a city the size of Christchurch might be a good basis. We're typically looking for 3 to 4 megawatts of power from that landfill. Just as an example, I think about half of Auckland's waste can generate about 14 or 15 megawatts.
I drive every day past a flaring nozzle, I guess you'd call it, and sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off, but that isn't being used presumably, right? So is this something that is starting to get rolled out and starting to get plugged in New Zealand, or is it still?
Actually, New Zealand is actually really good at this. If you go up to the Red Vale Energy Park, they always need a flare stack for if a generator stops. You need that gas to be handled appropriately. But they actually have about 14 megawatts at that site, and they do an incredible job of reusing the CO2 and the heat, and the energy is obviously, because of where it's located, is easy to export into the grid and provide energy. So Red Vale does a really good job, actually. You will still see a flare stack on those sites for the occasions when they can't run all the generators. But really, most of the sites in New Zealand are well handled. They're already captured because they've been required for compliance reasons. But it's really almost the third world that we're focusing on now, where there is no incentive to go and cap landfills and capture the methane and deal with it.
Well, how does it work from a business perspective? New Zealand business trying to scale now, and you're thinking about other countries where you're deploying a serious amount of kit, and you have to have arrangements with governments and other authorities in other countries. How does that actually work in practice, and what are some of the barriers that you're possibly currently struggling with?
It is a significant challenge that we're really building a team now to handle this sort of expansion. Depending on the country that we're operating in, we can operate as a New Zealand company or as an Australian company, or we may have to incorporate a subsidiary in the country that we're operating in. It really depends. It also depends where the investors into that particular project might prefer to be investing into. So in America, if we have US investors, they may want to invest into a US company which then operates in the country where the project is. So a lot of these projects, we have a model where the project itself is a vehicle that has its own set of investment and business model that's separate to GridShare as a company.
Okay. And so, yeah, like if people want to learn a little bit more, I know that there are a few Kiwis that are leading the charge. Daniel Batten is one of them that I'm aware of who's doing some amazing things around this.
Right.
Yeah. So if anyone want to follow someone who's really at the bleeding edge of this, follow that guy. But what would you recommend?
Yeah. So I think there's a few ways that you can get involved in Bitcoin mining. There's a few pretty large companies that you can use, mostly based in the US. Hosting. One would be Compass, for example. Compass Mining is a company where you can essentially sign up and buy a Bitcoin miner and then have them operate it for you at one of their sites. We can provide that service as well. We're obviously a little bit different to most of those miners. You're welcome to reach out to us. Our website is gridshare.co. My email is sam@gridshare.co.
Awesome. Thank you. And is there any of the socials that you're active on that people should be following you on?
Yeah, mostly LinkedIn, but I'm not a big social media user. But Daniel Batten, as you mentioned, he's an incredible communicator in the space, and he's active on X and LinkedIn.
Well, this has been a really good conversation. I think it just lifts a little bit around what Bitcoin mining really is about, and if you're still believing that somehow Bitcoin is bad for the environment, then I think it's pretty safe to say that myth is well and truly busted. And it's actually the opposite that's true. It's so much better for the environment. Yeah. And not just the environment that you breathe, but, the financial environment as well, right?
And so I think the overlapping opportunities, the confluence of this technology and our need for renewable energy transition and methane mitigation, it's a match made in heaven. Yeah, it's incredible.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for sharing with me today, Sam Kivi from GridShare. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, Darcy.